What's up, my wizards? It's Deb from SBMTG. We like it a magic, and hold on to your butt sacks for this one because we got some Throne of Eldraine spoilers for you today. That'll shock and awe. It's a freaking crazy day of spoilers. Today was the first official day, and I really don't want to waste much time, especially since you're just staring at a piece of art right now. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into it and start talking about what we got today with these temples here, because we got all the allied temples. We knew that we were going to get these. At least I assumed we were going to get these, and I think most other people did. We got them. They're awesome. Mana's a little bit better in standard, but not necessarily for aggro, and that kind of sucks. But let's go ahead and move on now that you see that we've got these temples. I mean, we were pretty sure we were going to get them. We got them. So let's actually go back in time a couple of days to cover a couple of cards that we saw over the weekend here. We saw Tymaret Calls the Dead, and I actually kind of like this a lot more than a lot of people do. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a saga. In Chapter 1 and 2, you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, and then you may exile a creature or enchantment card from your yard. If you do, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token, and on Chapter 3, you gain X life and Scry X, where X is the number of zombies you control. Now, first of all, the art is amazing on this card. I've seen a lot of people say they're creeped out by the art. I don't get it. It's incredible. But let's just put that aside for a second. This is actually kind of a sweet card that reminds a lot of people of History of Benalia, and I definitely get the comparison. Now, you're not guaranteed to get the zombie on each chapter of this. Now, the way you build your deck is going to really matter a lot here, so there's a bigger deck building cost, I think, to this card than there was to History of Benalia. Even if you didn't have any other knights on the table when History went off, you at least got, those 2 knights to get boosted that History made the couple of turns prior. So, in this case, there's a slightly higher deck building cost, but you're probably going to be playing creatures anyway. And I don't think that you need like a dedicated zombie deck for this to be good either. Just like you didn't really need a dedicated Knights deck for History to be good, right? Because if you keep these 2 zombies on the table, and suddenly you're gaining 2, you're scrying 2, which is really good to set up your next turn. I mean, there's just nothing wrong with the 3rd chapter of this, even if you have just 2 zombies out. Any more than that, and you're doing really well, and obviously this plays kind of decently with a mass, because a mass makes zombie tokens, so it counts them, and that's really cool. But I'm not really sure how good the card is when compared to other black 3-drops in the format right now. There's Midnight Reaper is kind of the big one that you have to play in a lot of decks, but there's also Ayara, and then going into other colors, there's things like Mayhem Devil. So 3-drop slot is super crowded, and I'm not sure that a lot of black decks want a card like this, especially considering the zombies don't add to your devotion or anything, and I think the black is going to take a turn towards devotion because Gary got reprinted. So I'm not really sure how great this card is in context of the format, but just in a vacuum, I really think that just about everything the card does is really, really nice. It's going to be pretty easy to put creatures and enchantments in the graveyard. Plus, this fuels any graveyard strategies. If you're trying to escape something out of your yard, this could be a huge help. Or just reanimate something with like Bond of Revival or Blood for Bones. You sacrifice a zombie token and get a huge creature out of your yard. So that could be really nice too. Let's move on to Galia of the Endless Dance. Everyone loves the art on this card, but I think the guy she's got in a headlock, like, is that his face or like his hair? I don't know. I do think the art is joyous though. So I don't want to put it down too much. The card itself is amazing. This is 2 mana, a red and a green for a 2/2 legendary satyr with haste, and other satyrs you control get +1/+1 and have haste, which is pretty cool. But also the good part: whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, you may discard a card at random. If you do, you draw 2 cards. Now, first of all, I like that this is a May ability. You're not always going to want to discard a card at random. The word random on this card really downgrades its utility in my eyes. I despise random discards. But of course, if you just have like 1 land in your hand or even like 2 lands in your hand, you really don't care about, that was a real burp. I'm sorry. I apologize for the unprofessionalism, but in any case, I mean, that's the kind of stuff that makes YouTube gold, so I'm going to keep it in. But in any case, this, I don't really mind. I don't really like random discards, but of course, again, like I said, if you just discard a land or something, then Galia is amazing, right? And this slots into Gruul decks pretty well. Zerta Goblin wasn't the best 2-drop in the world, and it's not like you're losing haste if you slot this this in instead of Zertok Goblins. So I really, really like this for Gruul aggro decks, even if you're not playing other Satyrs. But of course, having a Satyr Lord is really, really, really cool, you know. And these Gruul decks really needed some sort of card advantage piece, especially when they start running low on cards. But at the same time, you don't want to, you know, randomly discard your Embercleave or something. So this plays a little bit awkwardly, I think, and it's not going to always trigger. You know, having 3 creatures that attack all at the same time is not necessarily the easiest thing in the entire world, but I like this in like historic and maybe even modern with like Burning Tree Shaman. You know, if you go like turn 1 any creature, turn 2 Burning Tree Galia, then like you've got your hand down really, really low at that point in the game. You might not mind the random discard even on like turn 3. So actually, I think Galia is probably going to do a lot of work in a couple of different formats, and it's just a really strong 2-drop. But again, the word random on this card scares me so much. It scares me so much, but I think in most cases, you're not going to be worried about the word random because you only have 1 card in your hand that you don't care about anyway. So I think Galia is probably going to end up seeing a fair amount of play, but I've actually got to move on. There's just so many crazy cards to talk about today. So let's go to Woe Strider, more like Whoa Strider. This is 3 mana, 2 and a black for a 3/2 horror. And when it enters the battlefield, you create a 0/1 white goat creature token. So you can make goat tribal at this point. And you sacrifice another creature, scry 1. You can also escape this out of your graveyard for 3 and 2 black and exile 4 other cards. But there's more. Woe Strider escapes with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So it comes back as a 5/4, which is really good. You know, they can't shock it to death anymore at that point. So this, I got to tell you, the only line of text that really matters on this is sacrifice another creature, scry 1. We officially have a free sacrifice outlet that can sacrifice multiple creatures all in the same turn. So, you know, dust off your Cruel Celebrants and your Judiths and your Mayhem Devils and stuff. I guess you don't have to dust off your Mayhem Devils because we're already seeing play now. But this has the same problems like the other black 3-drop that we looked at. Like in the Mayhem Devil decks, you've got Midnight Reaper and this, and, you know... And, yeah, Mayhem Devil, Midnight Reaper, and Woe Strider, at least. Plus, like, Murderous Rider, if you want to play that. There's just so many 3-drops to play in that deck. So, I'm not really sure how many copies of Woe Strider you ultimately play, but I'm leaning towards 4. You know, at this point, I think that it's worth playing 12 3-drops, or maybe just dropping Midnight Reaper down to a 3 of, or even a 2 of, but I highly doubt that. I think you need your Midnight Reapers, but I think it's worth playing 11 3-drops, right? And you can easily put this in. Just being able to have a free sacrifice outlet is so much better than a card like even Priest of the Forgotten Gods, you know, which takes a whole turn to be able to activate. You can only sacrifice a couple of creatures a turn. You know, this, you can sacrifice your entire board if that's what you want to do. So, and in some cases you will, because it'll win you the game off of just damage, you know. Because cards like this have always been really highly sought after, very playable, and even if they had just reprinted like Nantuko Husk or something, it would probably end up seeing play. But this is so much better. Fixing your draws is incredible. If it ever does die, you can, you know, escape it, and it's much bigger after you escape it. You can put creatures in your graveyard with it, which is really, really nice. You know, you've effectively gotten 2 blockers on the battlefield when you play this because you also get the goat. There's just so many important lines of text on here. Don't get me wrong, like literally every single line of text is relevant and important, but that free sacrifice outlet is what's going to make this card see play above every other line of text on the card. And I'm really excited to get cracking with Woe Strider in the lab. So, whew, like that might be one of the most impactful cards of the day, but it says a lot that there's so much more to continue talking about. I want to hit on Bran Giant real quick, which isn't as good as Woe Strider, but, you know, this just looks like a sort of draft common that might be really relevant in that format in Limited, but this might actually be Pauper playable. You have to have 6 enchantments on the battlefield to cast this for just 1 blue, but that might not be as hard as I'm making it seem right now. Now, if you just cast this for like 3 mana, right? That requires having 4 enchantments, which still kind of sounds like a lot to my mind, but is nowhere near as many as 6. So I guess it's possible to cast this for 2, 3, 4 mana, and it's still like a decent deal. So I could see it seeing play in Pauper, and if there's any like really overpowered deck that plays almost nothing but enchantments, then this almost certainly goes in, because if you can have 6 enchantments on the battlefield by like turn 3 somehow, you know, so if you can make it happen, just playing this for 1 blue is insane, even if you have to wait till like turn 4 or 5 to do it. So I really do like Bran Giant, and I want to see if it has any relevance in Pauper, but I'm really not convinced. But I should bring it up, if only because like it got spoiled today. And it might actually have some real relevance in a format that a lot of people really like to play, myself included. So let's move on to Field of Ruin. By the way, there was a Field of Ruin reprint while we're just kind of shoehorning cards in to talk about for 30 seconds. Field of Ruin got reprinted. If only this had been in Throne of Eldraine, maybe Field of the Dead wouldn't have been like such a problem at the beginning of the format. But hey, we've got it now. So, and it's got really sweet art too. So glad to have Field back. It'll deaden any other, strategies that focus around one land, as long as that one land isn't like Lotus Field, because it's got hexproof. But still, Field of Ruin, nice to have you back. We also saw Nyx Lotus today. Nyx Lotus, look at the art on this. Speaking of incredible art, this is 4 mana for a legendary artifact that ETB's tapped. If you tap it, you choose a color and add an amount of mana of that color equal to your devotion to that color. So that's actually very good. I've seen a lot of people underwhelmed by this so far, but I think if nothing else, this is probably a commander staple, especially in monocolored commander decks, or even 2-color commander decks. This could end up being a staple. It's not great if you get your board wiped. It's really bad if you get your board wiped by, a Wrath of God type effect that just takes out all your creatures. But obviously, like a planar cleansing just makes this tap for 0. we have planar cleansing in standard right now, so I'm a little wary of it, but it's still like a really broken mana artifact that I think signals that we probably won't be seeing Nykthos. I think this is our replacement for Nykthos. Any deck can play it, but obviously it's going to go best in the monocolored decks, and especially my call is the blue decks, because the blue decks have access to Corridor Monitor. And with Corridor Monitor, if you have 6 mana, you can cast Nyx Lotus and then cast Corridor Monitor, untap Nyx Lotus, and possibly have access to more mana than you even had when you started the turn, depending on what your devotion to blue is. So I think that's a neat combo. But we've also got like Manifold Key, which any deck can play, but doesn't add to your devotion, which kind of sucks. But still, Manifold Key could go really well with the Nyx Lotus. Just untapping at the turn it enters the battlefield, or just same thing with Corridor Monitor here. You untap with a Nyx Lotus on the battlefield, you tap it for mana, and then you either Manifold Key it or cast Corridor Monitor, untap it, tap it again, and you've just got all of the mana in the world. So I actually do think this could end up seeing some real standard play. It's way better than a card like Firemind's Vessel or some such nonsense. I'm sorry if there was just a huge noise. My microphone wants to fall. I'm going to move on to a couple of gods that we saw today, starting with Erebos, Bleakhearted. I always want to say Blackhearted because he's black card. But anyway, Bleakhearted is 4 mana, 3 and a black for a 5/6 legendary enchantment creature, god, but indestructible. And as long as your devotion to black is less than 5, Erebos isn't a creature. And that's actually a fairly low devotion cost. Whenever another creature you control dies, you may pay 2 life. If you do, you draw a card. And then you can pay 1 and a black to sacrifice another creature and have target creature get weakness until end of turn. -2, -1 until end of turn. This card is pretty good. This card is great. It doesn't really add much to your devotion on turn 4. On turn 4, I'd much rather play something like Deathless Night. And it's worth noting, if you have a Deathless Night out, this is turned on, like, immediately. You only really need 4 other devotion if you have a Bleakhearted out. So that's pretty good. But even like Ayara on turn 3 into this on turn 4 puts you just 1 away from being able to swing or block with your Erebos. So if you have like a cat out or something, and suddenly Bleakhearted is a creature as soon as he comes down. So EBH actually looks pretty decent, and there's not a whole lot of black 4-drops that I'd rather play than this card. I mean, there are a few, I guess, like Dread Presence is pretty powerful, but this is probably a million times more powerful than Dread Presence, It's also got a drain life from you and draw a card ability, but this one is probably a little bit better. I think that it's a little bit of sweeper protection. If you're up against control, you don't care about your life total that much and you get time wiped. Well, then suddenly you can just draw like 3 cards. You don't care that you lost 6 life. And you keep your Erebos on the battlefield because it's got indestructible, so it can't get time wiped or anything like that. Kaya's Wrath. So I actually think, and you could even play Kaya's Wrath in your deck if you wanted to. That might actually work out as like a cheeky way to exploit this, because your Kaya's Wrath, you'll gain a couple of life from Kaya's Wrath if you kill your creatures, but you can just use that to, draw 3 cards. So, maybe, but I really like that this is decent sweeper protection. It's really not hard to get it online to attack or block. That's pretty sweet. This is a free card draw outlet. This doesn't cost any mana to draw cards off of it. Even though the card draw is conditional, it being, it requiring no mana is actually a huge deal. And obviously too, it synergizes with itself. If you sacrifice a creature to kill something else, then you can, pay 2 life because you sacked a creature and draw a card. That's fantastic too. There's just so many ways this plays, and so many, boards that I think this can do a lot of work on. And it's actually got a really interesting like threat of activation if you swing in or if your opponent swings in. If you've got 4 mana open, well, suddenly you can sacrifice 2 creatures and just like, kneecap your opponent's creatures in combat, block with some bigger stuff, Erebos included. So I think this card has some really interesting implications. The only bad thing I have to say is that if you sacrifice creatures, that might decrease your devotion and suddenly Erebos isn't a creature anymore. That might suck, but at the same time, there's so much that the card does, so much utility for 4 mana that I think the card is unbelievable. Even if it's not a creature, even if you don't have the devotion to turn it on, it still does so much, like in these Black-White Aristocrats decks, for instance, it might not actually be turned on, but it's still a really good creature just because, it's got an incredible activated ability and a great triggered ability. So it's just, you can go off in so many ways in so many decks with Erebos. I think it's probably going to see some amount of standard play, but let's move on to another 4 mana god here. This one, the green one. Nylia Sharp-Eyed is 4 mana, 3 and a green for a legendary enchantment creature god. She's a 5/6 with indestructible. And as long as your devotion to green is less than 5, Nylia Sharp-Eyed, not a creature. So 5 is the number we're going with these 4 mana monocolored gods. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. You can also pay 2 and a green to reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, you put it into your hand. Otherwise, you can put it into your graveyard. Now, I really like this, especially, it's just like I was saying with Erebos. On turn 3, you go Yorvo, and on turn 4, Nylia, and she's almost a creature. I mean, add like a Paradise Druid, a Gilded Goose, or a Barkhide Troll or something to that, and suddenly Nylia is a creature. The turn she enters the battlefield, and she can block when you say go. She can attack when you untap on the next turn. It's just really sweet. Devotion to 5 is not hard to hit, especially in green, just like it's not hard to hit in black. You can hit it in green really easily and not really sacrifice any card quality in your deck. Like you don't really mind playing Yorvo in your green deck. So I really like Nylia. I think she's going to see a fair amount of play too. Let's move on to some more incredibly powerful cards. What do I want to cover next? Let's see here. Let's go with Storm Herald, because Herald is probably just a jank card, but it is the jank card of my dreams. This is 3 mana, 2 and a red for a 3/2 human shaman with haste. And when it ETBs, return any number of aura cards from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to creatures you control. Exile those auras at the beginning of your next end step. If those auras would leave the battlefield, exile them instead of putting them anywhere else. So this might be really sweet if you can somehow mill yourself and put really expensive auras into the graveyard, pollen bright wings, expensive stuff into your graveyard, or even auras that might, have some sort of benefit when they go to the graveyard, create a creature or something, create a +1/+1 counter. I'm sure there's a lot of auras out there that have some sort of when this goes to the graveyard, benefit. There are things that you could mill into your graveyard, and then when they go back to your graveyard after Storm Herald's trigger resolves at the end of the turn, then they could come back to your hand. Things like Rancor, for instance, are a good example. So there's a lot of ways to kind of play with Storm Herald, and it's really sweet that it has haste. So even if you don't have any other creatures out, you can just throw all your auras on Storm Herald, swing in. So like if there's a way to throw a bunch of auras into your graveyard on turn 1 and 2 and then hit Storm Herald for like a million, that could be really sweet. We've got stuff like Merfolk's Secret Keeper, Wall of Lost Thoughts in standard right now to play on turn 1 and turn 2. And throw auras into the graveyard, and then Storm Herald turn 3, and what do you got? Who knows? Hopefully your opponent can't just like Tyrant Scorn it or something at instant speed, but you've got a really good dank jank deck brewing up, or like an against the odds type deck brewing up with Storm Herald, and I can't wait. Again, I'm going to get in the lab with it and see what we can do, but I don't have too many high hopes for it, but I do think it's going to be a really, really fun card to mess around with. And, a top decked Storm Herald on turn 8 could actually be incredibly sweet. So we'll have to wait and see. I do think that the card has some applications, but it mostly looks like, jank gold. A diamond in the jank rough, but we'll see if we can, brush off the edges and make it an actual, smooth card. But I highly doubt it, but it is a fun looking card above all else. But I'm going to move on here. We don't really have much time. I'm pretty sure I've been talking for like 3 hours already. So let's move on to Underworld Breach. I am into this breach right here, y'all. This might be the most powerful card spoiled in the entire set so far. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for an enchantment. Each non-land card in your graveyard has escape. The escape cost is equal to the card's mana cost, plus exile 3 other cards from your graveyard. At the beginning of the end step, sacrifice Underworld Breach. So you get it for 1 turn. That's all you should need it for. In Legacy, you can go like Lion's Eye Diamond and Brain Freeze. Always. I have told y'all before a million times how much I love Brain Freeze. And all you got to do is have LED and Brain Freeze, and you win the game. Because if you've forgotten, once you cast this non-land card with Escape, if it's like an instant or a sorcery or something, it resolves and goes right back to your graveyard. You can cast it again. So it's just unfreaking believable what you can do with Underworld Breach. And you're casting Brain Freeze on yourself very likely, and you're just going to cast like the 4-mana Jace from War of the Spark out of your graveyard, or Laboratory Maniac or something out of your graveyard, and you'll run yourself out of cards, right? So you'll just die, and Jace will win the game for you. Or Lab Maniac wins the game for you in that situation. So, like that, I mean, that's the deck, right there. That's the deck this goes in. But this could go in so much. You know, people have talked about how this is kind of a Yawgmoth's Will, in a way, but, you know, it makes you really use your graveyard as a resource. You know, if you exile cards from your graveyard, you can't cast them with Underworld Breach that turn. So you have to be really judicious about what you want to cast and what you want to get rid of. So, but if there's a deck that can just dump its graveyard, or, you know, dump its library into its graveyard, and there are, you know, people have already talked about how this could go in Modern Dredge really well, you know, obviously. So Underworld Breach has so many ridiculous applications in older formats, but I want to try it in Standard. But I think this is one of those cards that, like, the older the format, the better it looks. You know, a 2-mana Yawgmoth's Will is just mind-blowing, especially in a color that probably shouldn't have access to something like this. Like, just in Modern Burn, this is probably pretty insane, because if you play 1 or 2 copies and you draw it in games that go long, you know, you draw it on turn 4, turn 5, you might be able to just recast 2 lightning bolts out of your graveyard and win the game. So, like, it just has so many applications that might not, you know, appear at first on a surface level, but, you know, it really doesn't take much, you know, looking into the Breach before you realize how unbelievably powerful an effect like this is. You know, this might be purely the most broken card in the entire set, and this is a set that we've only seen, you know, a small percentage of. And this is a very broken, very scary card that a lot of pros have already taken to Twitter to say they are scared of. So I want to just add that I'm not a pro, but I want to add my voice to the congregation here. Underworld Breach looks very, very, you know, scary. It makes me nervous that it exists. So I'm worried, but I'm also a little bit worried about a card that looks a lot more innocuous upon first glance. Let me get a sip of coffee to add to the suspense. Because what could I possibly be talking about? There's so many powerful cards from today. It's Thirst for Meaning. I had a thirst for coffee a second ago. Thirst for Meaning, which is something a lot of Magic players have been looking for in Standard Magic over the last couple of years. It's 3 mana, 2 and a blue for an instant. That is key. Draw 3 cards, then discard 2 cards unless you discard an enchantment card. What? This is unbelievable. Like, in case you weren't playing when Thirst for Knowledge was a card, this is an unbelievable effect. At instant speed. At sorcery speed, this might actually have still been kind of playable, but at instant speed, this is freaking unbelievable. Control decks really want a 3-mana instant speed, draw 3, even if they have to discard 2, especially considering they can discard something with Jumpstart, like Chemist's Insight or Radical Idea. They can discard a card with Escape, for instance, like Elspeth, you know? So even if you have to discard the 2, and this doesn't actually get you any real card advantage, you know, it's still a phenomenal card. But if you do discard an enchantment, you do get real card advantage out of this. You know, you get 2-for-1 card advantage. And it's just it's freaking crazy at instant speed. You cast this at the end of your opponent's turn, everybody. This costs you effectively 0 mana to cast. You know, if you're holding up Sinister Sabotage or Absorb or something, and your opponent doesn't cast a spell that turn, well, you just get 3 cards. Whoops. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that this could be really playable in, like, Reanimator decks. You know, you could discard the 2, and it's not a downside whatsoever. It's just a crazy card. It's going to see play in so much stuff, whether it's Reanimator, Escape decks. You know, there's, oh, goodness, there's control decks, enchantment-based decks, obviously. You know, it's just, I really have to hammer home how good 3-mana instant speed draw 3 is. Even if you have to ultimately discard the 2 because you don't have an enchantment, it's still freaking crazy the kind of filtering you can do with a card like this. Now, we're actually getting late into the day here. We've only got a few more cards to talk about, but they're all just insane. Like, Oh, God. Let's move on to Perforins Blood here. This is 5 mana, 4 and a red for a 7/6 legendary enchantment creature. It's God with indestructible. And as long as your devotion to red is less than 5, Perforins isn't a creature. Other creatures you control have haste. That's going to be important when you read the activated ability. You can pay 2 and a red, and you may put a red creature card or an artifact creature card from your hand onto the battlefield. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. It's hard not to laugh when you read it. I've read it like a dozen times already, but I still laugh because this is sneak attack in standard. It costs more mana, but like, so who cares? You know, you can play, what is it? Terror of what's its face. It's this card on your screen right now. I'm sorry if you're listening. It's a 7 mana thing that gives all your creatures double strike and has double strike itself. Just play that from your hand. You know, play Ilharg from your hand, and then Ilharg can play something else from your hand when it attacks. So, oh my goodness, Drakusith, ball. The stuff that you can play is just absolutely crazy. You know, you can get an artifact creature too. So if you just wanted to play like a Golos out of your hand or a Meteor Golem, even, you know, you could do that. It's all good. It's all crazy. And like, not to mention older formats where you have your pick of just unbelievable artifact creatures you can play and red creatures you can play. But even just in standard, there's a long and storied list of unbelievable garbage you can throw onto the battlefield with this. And it has haste, you know. I don't think the card is broken at 5 mana, because 5 mana is a good bit. One activation of this and sometimes just win you the game outright. There's not much your opponent can do about it. So this is another card I'm a little worried about, and I think that the mana cost is right. But even at this mana cost, I think it's an unbelievable card. You know, imagine this in like Fires, you know. Because, oh my God, imagine this in Fires. You cast it on turn 5. And then you get another free spell on turn 5. Plus, you can actually use your mana to activate the card and get effectively another spell. So, you know, you play a red Cavalier after this, and then you can play another creature out of your hand for 3 mana, and it doesn't count as a spell for Fires, right? And you can use like your other remaining mana to give all your creatures a boost with Cavalier, but you don't even have to. That's another thing. You don't even have to have mana open when you cast your Cavalier to pump Cavalier and give it haste, because all your creatures already have haste. Like, Perforins is insane in Fires. if it doesn't see play in any other deck, it'll be in that deck. So, woo! But let's move on to another crazy 5 mana red card that I've actually put ahead of Perforins, because I think this card is possibly a mistake. You know, just this is a day of broken red cards. This is Ox of Aganist, and it's gonna just crazy. Like, I have to gather myself before I even start reading the card. This is 5 mana, 3 and 2 red for a 4/2 Ox. And when it ETBs, you discard your hand, and then you draw 3 cards. But you can escape it from your graveyard for 2 red, and then you exile 8 other cards from your graveyard. But it escapes with a +1/+1 counter on it. Now, just think of how easy it is to adapt to Terramander for 1 blue mana. It's fairly easy in some games, especially you build your deck the proper way. It's really easy. And my first thought on this was just that I think it's a really good, like, long game piece. You know, even if you just mill it into your graveyard, you don't even get to cast it the first time. Just mill it into your graveyard or discard it somehow, you know. Then suddenly you can cast this for just 2 red mana. You have to exile the 8 other cards, which I'm not saying is like low. That's a ridiculous amount of cards to have to exile. But I don't think it's hard either, you know. It's cards like Dig Through Time, for instance, and Treasure Cruise have proven before that it's really not too hard to, you know, break these rules. Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time were supposed to be cards that you cast on like turn 5 or turn 6, you know, and you have to have a really high deck building cost to cast them in the first place. But that in the past has proven untrue. And I think that might be true here with Ox of Aganist too, in that, like, it's going to be fairly easy in a lot of spell-based decks, you know, blue-red spells, to throw a bunch of instants and sorcery into your graveyard and discard this as well. You know, Blue-Red Phoenix, for instance, is going to put a bunch of cards in its graveyard. And it's going to be fairly easy to cast your Ox out of the graveyard for just 2 red mana and draw 3 cards, you know, at little cost to you. At very little cost to you. But do note that if you cast it the first time, you actually discard like 2 or 3 cards. That fuels your ability to get it out of the graveyard with Escape later. At just 2 mana, this is like 2 mana to draw 3 cards and put a 5/3 into play. That's so busted. Like, that's so busted. If you go on the Spike subreddit right now, there are already people talking about how to get this into play on like turn 2 or 3 in older formats. So like, not even in standard, like the older you go, the more busted the card is. Like, it's so good. Like, this isn't one that I have a snappy joke or some kind of, pun for or anything. This is just an unbelievable Magic card. They tried to like make Bedlam Reveler more safe. It looks like kind of a remake of Bedlam Reveler, but I think this is probably better than Bedlam Reveler in a lot of ways. God, especially considering we have it in standard. It's just, whoo, like this in like Rix Mighty Reveler, these Rakdos decks. And by the way, Rix Mighty Reveler is insane with this too, because, they kind of synergize. And that Rix Mighty Reveler makes you dump a card. You can dump this into your graveyard with Rix Mighty Reveler, or you can just add to the amount of cards you have in your graveyard with Rix Mighty Reveler, so you can eventually escape this. There is no limit, y'all. Like, this set is insane, and I've already seen some people say, like, oh, I don't like this set. This looks like the Power Down set after Eldraine. Nah, I don't know about that. I mean, this is the first real day of spoilers, and I think they hoodwinked us. The old bait and switch, the first couple of weeks of spoilers, we were like, okay, there's some exciting stuff. It looks kind of good, but not too powerful. I like that. That's fine. But then today, the rope-a-dope. They got us tired, and then they just decided to unload, to pop, 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 lefts and rights, crosses. Just insane. This Wizards has a hell of a left hook. And they popped us with it today, just insane card after insane card in this set dropped today. But we're not even done. I've got one more to talk about. This is Kunoros, Hound of Athreos. This is 3 mana. It rhymes with itself, which I like. This is 3 mana for a 3/3 legendary hound with Vigilance, Menace, and Lifelink. And creature cards in graveyards can't enter the battlefield. Whoops. And players can't cast spells from graveyards. Oops. So this invalidates the Ox. I like that they've given us another answer in the set for, mechanics like Escape. The last few sets we've seen mechanics that were unanswerable until a couple of sets in the future. Energy is a pretty decent example. Energy is a great example, actually. But in any case, we, thanks to Grafdigger's Cage and a couple of other cards, and now Kunoros, we have a litany of answers to the escape mechanic. And this one isn't relegated to the sideboard. Orzhov decks just want this. I haven't even talked about the fact that this is a 3 mana 3/3 with 3 really good keyword abilities. By the way, note the threes, because it's got 3 heads. 3 mana, 3/3, 3 abilities. Very cute flavor, Wizards. But, this is only taken down a very small peg by being legendary. If you could have multiple copies of this out, it would be pretty insane. But, I'm sorry I keep reusing the word insane. I don't have another word for what they've done to us today. I'm just pretty excited because woo is this set nuts. 3 mana, 3/3, Vigilance, Menace, Lifelink. Just imagine how those abilities interplay. By the way, those are all very good abilities to share on a card together. And the other 2 lines of text on it are really good graveyard hosters that, again, isn't relegated to the sideboard. You just play this in the main deck. It's pretty good. So and it's such a good boy. They should really print more dogs, because I love seeing the community go like, oh, he's a good boy whenever we print a dog. So I love this thing. I'm not really sure like what deck plays it, right? Like just some sort of Orzhov mid-range deck of some kind. And it has all the same problems that I was talking about with 3-drops earlier. There's so many desirable 3-drops in like Orzhov and Mardu decks that I'm not 100% sure where it slots into, but at the same time, like, it's just such a powerful card that it reminds me of like Vampire Nighthawk and stuff. And I can see it definitely seeing some play just because the body is so stout. And, it does have a deck building cost, and that like you can't use escape cards. That kind of sucks. You can't reanimate stuff. That really sucks, but at the same time, just having a creature with these 3 abilities at such a low cost, at such a good rate, is probably worth it in and of itself. So I like a lot about this card. It's far from the most crazy card of the day, but it was the last card that got spoiled today, the last card that got previewed, I should say. Some people get like mad when I say spoiled instead of previewed. To me, it's all the same. But in any case, that was the last card that was previewed today, so I wanted to end on it. But anyway, that's all. I'm not really sure how long this video was. Let's check the Audacity file. 44 minutes. I hope you stayed with me for the entire thing. If you did, you must really like me. Make sure you subscribe to the bell for the notifications, because spoiler season's officially on, and we're going to get spoilers like every day of the week. So you want to be subscribed so you get all those. Hit the bell for the noties. Like the video to spread the spoiler love around and help you boy out in terms of metrics. Also, hit the links in the description to go over to TCG Player, pre-order any of this stuff because I think you'll want to now. I wasn't too sure about this set until today, but boy, you probably want to get your hands on some of this stuff early and at low prices. So hit the link to go to TCG Player, check it all out. It's a good price guide if nothing else. And then hit up the link for the Patreon in the description as well if you want to help me out. January 1st, which is in like 2 days, there's going to be a very serious cut in wages for literally all of your favorite YouTubers. So please go to the Patreon and help out. It means so much. But aside from that, I think I'm done. So I got to get out of here. I mean, we're 45 minutes in, so I'll catch you cats later. I'm Death from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Make sure you let me know how you feel about all these in the sideboard, the comment section down there, because there's a lot. There's a lot to discuss. There's so much. Did I over-evaluate anything today? Or did I even under-evaluate anything in a day where I probably said every card was amazing, because they kind of all are. But anyway, just let me know down there. I'm really interested in your opinions. It's always an important time during the season to kind of put our heads together and talk these cards out. But anyway, do that, and I will catch y'all later. I'm Dead from the Place. Thanks for watching, wizards. Spread love and be kind.